counselors have been hearing from families that they have concerns surrounding the pandemic and mental health. And so that's how the topic for tonight evolved. I'm going to introduce our panelists who are mental health professionals in our community with partnering organizations. And I'll start with Esmeralda Huang, who is a licensed professional counselor associate and bilingual clinical therapist with Vita Clinic. Esme graduated with her master's in counseling from St. Edward's University. She has 2 years of counseling experience working with children, adults, and couples. Esme's areas of focus include anxiety, depression, trauma, grief and loss, self-esteem challenges, social problems, and adjustment to life's transitions. She promotes a non-judgmental environment for her clients to empower them to reach their full potentials. Our second panelist is Laura Banks, who's a licensed clinical social worker and the director of program development with Vita Clinic. Laura has nearly 15 years of experience working in schools, as well as inpatient and outpatient mental health settings. Her primary areas of focus include anxiety, trauma and PTSD, depression, life transitions, grief and loss, stress, and self-esteem issues. Laura believes high-quality mental health and wellness opportunities must be accessible and equitable. And finally, we have Teresa Shigemasa, who is a licensed professional counselor and registered play therapist supervisor. Her experience includes domestic violence intervention prevention and school-based behavioral health in elementary and middle schools. Ms. Shigemasa joined the Samaritan Center in 2011, where she works with all ages, adults, children, adolescents, and parents. Her specializations are mood diagnoses, including trauma and PTSD, learning disabilities, including autism spectrum disorder and situational depression and anxiety. Both Ms. Banks and Ms. Shigemasa are trained in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, or EMDR, which is used in the healing from psychological trauma. Ms. Banks and Ms. Wang from Vita Clinic will address some of the effects the pandemic has had on families in terms of how there might be possible feelings of isolation and anxiety, and they will give strategies for how parents can help their children. Ms. Shigemasa will address self-care for parents and how to know when professional help may be needed for themselves as parents or for their children. We will start with Ms. Banks, followed by Ms. Wang, and then Ms. Shigemasa. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. We're really thrilled to be here and to connect with the Dripping Springs ISD parent community. So thank you all for taking the evening to talk about this really important topic, and we welcome your questions at the end and look forward to interacting in this way. And now I will hand things over to Esme.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Like Laura said, my name is Esme. I'm one of the therapists with Vita Clinic, and I have a short PowerPoint that I will share in just a couple of minutes. And I first wanted to address just kind of all the changes that we are all experiencing and we've been experiencing these last few months, and how that's brought about new challenges for all of us, but particularly as parents, as we're trying to merge the workplace into the home, and we're trying to manage our children's schedules, and now helping them connect. And I think the changes, just kind of keep on coming. And as we're starting to adjust to, we had a back to school date, most of us started online. And so helping our children adjust to that change of, yes, we are back in school, it's no longer summer, and doing that for a few weeks. And then now sort of gradually going back to school as well, physically, and helping our children manage those changes, because even though they are back in school, things look very different for them. They look very different for us as well as parents. And so, in just addressing how that's impacting all of us, and normalizing those feelings of isolation, the high anxiety of the unknown. We don't know how long these changes are going to happen for, what other changes are there going to be. And in a lot of people, that does bring up a lot of anxiety. And so keeping in mind that these are not normal times, and so therefore our abnormal reactions are actually normal, because there are so many changes. And so it is taking a minute to kind of look at what those changes have done and how they're impacting our parenting, really is kind of the focus of this evening. And then focusing on also addressing our own mental health. I know many times parents will lean on the children and focusing on them and making sure they're well, but it's really important, like they say on an airplane, of putting your own mask first, and in order for you to be able to help. So it is important that we take a minute to see how all of these changes are impacting parents as well, and how we can help, and then in turn be able to help our children. So I'll share my screen now, and hopefully you'll be able to see the presentation. And I'll make it a little bit bigger to make sure you can see that. So y'all can see that, Laura? Is that good? Okay, just making sure. So a little bit about, I just wanted to sort of look at it from a wider scope of what is going on in the US. This was the CDC did a study back in June about mental health needs and what people were experiencing at that point in time. And so what they found even back in June is that symptoms of anxiety disorder were 3 times higher than had been reported in 2019 at a similar time frame. So a big increase. And again, this is June, so even then there was still, there was a lot of uncertainty, but I think mentally we all thought, okay, by the time school starts, we'll be back to normal, and this will, you know, things will be adjusting a little bit. But yet here we are, you know, in early October. And so the other thing also, the prevalence of depressive disorder was 4 times what it had been in the previous year. So a lot of increases in mental health needs due to all the changes that we are experiencing. Even just today, I was talking to a parent who's concerned about, you know, her child's anger outbursts. And so we were having a conversation about, you know, why that's happening, and just knowing that, you know, students especially were hoping that they'd be back in school at this time. They had already missed the end of the school year. They were really hoping that they'd be back in school. And so in children, you know, that the stress looks like behavioral changes, and they start to act out a little bit more, and that's how the stress many times is expressed in children. And then for us as adults, just in talking to this parent, talking about, she shared that she too sometimes, you know, just feels anxious and has same kind of expressive anger. And so, you know, talking about how it's a good example to talk to your child about those feelings as well, setting the example of, you know, I'm having some of those same feelings, and maybe sharing a connection with your child in that sense as well. So I just wanted to get a little bit of a broader kind of picture and talk about how this is uncharted territory for parents, for everybody. And so it is normal that we're having sort of these different reactions to it. So, so I want to just kind of focus a little bit on as a short exercise, something that could that could maybe help you through this as well, in looking at how things are changing. And so focusing on things that you can control and letting go of things that you cannot control. I know this is easier said than done, but really kind of honing in on some of those decisions that are being made at this point in time about us. And so one of the things I notice that people sometimes tend to do is you have a worry, you have an anxiety, you have kind of a strong feeling about something, and we tend to carry it around with us without realizing that we're doing that. So maybe we're feeling tense in the neck, or our stomach gets upset. There's different ways that these things kind of show themselves in our lives, but we see that we're walking around with this all day, not really stopping and thinking, what is it that's worrying me? And sometimes even just giving ourselves that minute to think about, what is it that's worrying me? Why am I so upset all day still? And then focusing on what is within my control. Is there something I can do about that worry? Is there something that I can do about that decision that's been made? And then, what matters most to me, and what can I do about that? So I'll give you kind of a little example using the approach of the pipe cleaner and a rock perspective. So I have a little pipe cleaner here with me. And so the pipe cleaner, you can look at it and you can shape it into whatever shape you want to make it. And there's something about just kind of telling in very simple terms, telling your hands, your brain tells your hands, do this, and then your hands actually do it. And there's something really satisfying. It helps us, in play therapy, we call it mastery. The kids sometimes really want to have that feeling of accomplishment, even when it comes to small things. So you have the pipe cleaner and you tell your brain, I really want to turn this pipe cleaner into the shape of a triangle. And so you do that, and it's satisfying and it feels good. And so because you were able to make that change, right? And so it feels successful when you're able to do that. And then when you have a rock, if you look at things from a rock perspective, so I have a rock from my backyard, and if I tell myself I really need to change this rock into a triangle, so I'm going to focus on changing this rock into a triangle shape. Well, that's not going to happen, right? And so unless I guess I use tools, but I'm not going to use that. But I would get really disappointed and really frustrated if I told myself, Esme, you really need to make this rock into a triangle shape. I just wouldn't be able to do that. And so that would really bring about frustration with myself because I wasn't able to do a task that I told myself I was going to do. It would make me frustrated with the rock as well. So taking that approach when we're looking at what life is, and so at some of the problems that we have, or some of the anxieties that we have. So some examples of that would be for the date when school returns back to campus. That is a rock problem. There's nothing we can do about that to change it. Somebody gives us that date, tells us when to go, gives us a schedule, so no point in focusing on that problem because it's a rock. Learning how a teacher assigns grades and takes attendance, that's a pipe cleaner problem. You can email the teacher, you can find out how those grades are going to be assigned, you can get more information so you can solve. The weather is a rock. Some days, even though we're all ready for fall weather, we don't always get it. And so that we can't change that. the pipe cleaner is what to wear. You can carry an umbrella, you can carry a coat, or, you know, you can make those decisions and make those changes. And these are just some really simple examples. Obviously, you know, life is more complicated sometimes than this, but it's really more about focusing, how do I approach this problem? And is this a problem that I can focus some energy into and bring about a change? Or is this something that I'm not going to be able to change it? So focusing energy on that is just really going to make me more frustrated. So as problems come up in our lives, we're looking at them, and then we are evaluating whether, you know, it renders our energy or not. So again, focusing on things that are within our control will help us feel more powerful. And nowadays, when there's a lot that's out of our control, being able to focus on those things that we can control will help us feel useful and powerful. This is an activity that I do with some of my clients. And so it's similar to the rock and pipe cleaner example. But these are about sort of letting go. And we look with our clients at what are some of the things that you can't control. Those things are things that we've got to let go. We have to put those rocks down, and we have to kind of keep walking, because they're just going to take up our energy and make us more upset. And so again, this is from the sources, My Big Life Journal. They have some great downloads that you can work on, but it could be an activity that you could do as a family. And you know, as an example, being a positive example for mental health with your children, you can look at this and say, well, you know, some of your things are going to be different from mine, but let's think about what are some of the things that we can control and what are some of the things that we can let go. So, so the kids love kind of focusing on that, and there's always sort of this focus on the things that that they can control. They really enjoy thinking about that, just like we do. It's just more satisfying to think about things that we're good at and that we can change. So that's the information, the tidbit I have to help you manage the stress as a parent. And then I'll pass it back to Laura, and she can talk a little bit more about VLAN.
Sure. That was great, Esme. Thank you so much for all of that. I love that it's that information includes like tangible takeaways that we can use with our children, but we can also maybe apply towards ourselves, including trying to turn our children into pipe cleaners when they might eat rocks or vice versa. And so I think it's just good information for all of us, and that's the idea of doing those exercises as a family. VIV Clinic is a behavioral health agency located right here in the Austin, Central Texas area. We have licensed clinical therapists on staff, and we work with individuals, school districts, including Dripping Springs ISD, and community partners to provide individual therapy, family counseling, group counseling. We love being able to communicate and connect with the community in this way through presentations or through kind of consultation opportunities. I'll share this information with our Dripping Springs partners, Kim and Karen. I'm sure we'll be in touch and you can share this out, but we will be offering some parent workshops coming up this fall. And so we would love to get to know you all better and to offer the resources that we're going to be hosting. Our nonprofit affiliate, Seek Institute, will be working in partnership with another local nonprofit to bring some parenting groups just in time for the holidays, which will be another opportunity to kind of figure out new normals around holiday rituals and school breaks and how we can navigate all of that in the healthiest way possible. So Thank you again for having us, and we'll now hand things over to Teresa from the Samaritan Center.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me tonight to your parent university. Very excited to be here. So I'm basically going to just dovetail on a lot of the things that Esme was just bringing up. One of the things that I took away from her presentation was the importance of your own self-care. And what I want to really reiterate is that self-care is not being selfish, and it's actually good to model your own self-care for your children. So we've been in this now for about 7 months, this kind of roller coaster of ups and downs and uncertainty and then isolation and then opening up again, not opening up again, masks, no masks, lots of confusing messages. Our children, I think, like I heard Esme saying earlier, at first it was like, okay, it's kind of cool, I'm at home, it's almost like an extended summer. And then they also were feeling the stress of really wanting to get back into a routine and back into school. And so there's a lot of things that are going on there between parents and children. And sometimes parents, if you have high schoolers, you may be in a sandwich generation and you're dealing with your own parents and some of those issues that come up. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our window of tolerance. And window of tolerance is, I would imagine a lot of our windows of tolerance right now don't look like this, which is a wave. And so a wave of window of tolerance is when we're kind of feeling like we're cruising and things aren't so bad and we're dealing with daily life, and maybe someone cuts us off in traffic, or we took a look at our child's grade portal and we saw that there were some missing assignments, and so we're going to go up a little bit throughout the day, but then we want to move back down and then up and move back down. So that's the kind of wave window of tolerance that many of us are attempting to get to again. What has happened since March and the shutdown, some of our windows of tolerance might have looked like, I'm going to hold it together. I'm going to I'm going to hold it inside here, but be okay, because I have to be okay for my children to not get anxious, for my parents to not get anxious. So we might be internalizing a lot of things and getting, our own stress and our own anxiety is going up. Or the other way that can happen with our window of tolerance is you can go straight up a steep, incline, and then boom, you come crashing back down. And people that have chronic PTSD have that type of window of tolerance. But, some of us now are feeling some of those effects we are kind of having some PTSD responses. Some of us are, some aren't. It just depends on what spectrum you're on. But you can't sustain up here that hyper arousal state or the anxious state for long without crashing down again, and then going into what we call a hypoarousal state or a more depressive state. So there's a depletion. And so what we're usually looking at is, how do we get back to homeostasis? How do we go from this high anxiety or boom, bottomed out, no motivation, put one foot in front of the other, and how do we get back into that homeostasis? So I'm going to attempt to share my screen as well, and let's hope that this works. I've done it with other platforms. Let's see, what do I have to do here? So advanced and, oh, there it is. It's down here and it says share. So hopefully you can see that. And so this is just a little basic handout that has a lot of different categories on how we can take care of ourselves on a physical realm, emotional, social, spiritual, personal, space, financial, and work. So let's focus a little bit on that, on that physical, it may be difficult to be getting enough sleep or to be getting restful sleep. And I know that's extremely important for us to feel regulated. I'm hoping, I've heard from a lot of people that they are now getting out in nature more, even if there's a lot of trails up in the Dripping Springs area. I know, I have friends that live up there. I live in Southwest Austin myself. So, exploring the woods, going out with your pets, enjoying your pets, enjoying nature. Those are things that I think a lot of people have grown to do. And with your children, playing more with your children and being there for them. Spiritual, I like the physical and the spiritual because there's a lot of kind of cross-referencing there with the yoga and the meditation and connection and nature. So sometimes taking care of ourselves physically, we're also taking care of ourselves spiritually. And then that parasympathetic nervous system, or our rest and digest, our heart rate, our breathing, our ability to really breathe, because when we're very anxious, we stop breathing. When we're very anxious, our mouth dries up, but we can turn on those relaxation responses by doing things that are physically, taking care of ourselves. At the same time, maybe our own children joining us and doing that with them. But it's also taking care of that spiritual side. The other one I'd like to focus on is the social, and especially with the, self-imposed and the externally imposed self-isolation that we were all feeling a lot of, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. I like to use the word physical distancing, not socially distancing. It's important that, yes, we had to physically, or we still have to physically distance from others to a great extent, but do we have to socially distance? And we have this capability to do virtual meetups with each other. I think that's wonderful. I have some clients that have special wine nights with their girlfriends, and they do it, virtually. I think those are very important to still keep your social connections, especially when you have like a lot of younger children in the household, and you're dealing with being their teacher sometimes, as well as their tutor, as well as their parent. It's important that you have time for your own social outlets. And then the boundaries up there. So you see that under social, you can see boundaries is listed right underneath it. And a lot of times what happens with us is that if someone in the family is having a meltdown, and I think Esme also addressed this, if your child or your teen is having, a hard time and they're having a difficult time, and for emotional reasons, whatever, they're having a meltdown, or they're just frustrated or very upset, it's very difficult sometimes for us to separate ourselves from their feelings. Yeah, so how do we set emotional boundaries? That's their feelings. How do I remain regulated? How do I remain as calm as possible? You notice I took a deep breath there. Sometimes we just need to take one big deep breath and maybe a big swig of water to turn on that relaxation response. That's what water does for us. Try to regulate so that then we can help our child with co-regulation. So those emotional boundaries are very important, and I really wanted to stress that importance. Down here, the personal, I know a lot of people that are taking up hobbies. It's like, hey, now I actually have time. Look at Lowe's and Home Depot. I think they're some of the companies that are doing some of the best right now across the nation, with everyone doing DIY projects and things of that nature. There's just all these kind of wonderful things. Honoring your true self, being authentic, being okay to say, this is how I feel, using those I statements. If you're feeling something, I'm feeling very frustrated. I wonder if you may be feeling the same way. I like what Esme was also saying about that in terms of co-regulating with your child, but if they're having an anxious moment, you can relate to that and say, I have some anxious moments too. And thank you so much for sharing that Big Life Journal page. I love that. And parents can do some of those things together with their children. And it opens up a whole line of communication and conversation around emotions and how you can effectively communicate those with each other. I know that there are people that are having a lot of financial struggles right now, especially our small businesses, so you definitely have my heart. So, I mean, there's some ideas there. At the same time, I realize that we may need more than that, and you know, hopefully you're finding resources to help you if you're in that category right now. Work, of course, time management, work boundaries with your coworkers, not letting their emotional issues, you know, become yours. How can you remain empathetic and connect with them and say, wow, that must be really awful. I'm sorry that you're feeling like that, without taking it on yourself, and having more break times. So I'll stop with that screen, and I hope that I still have a little bit more time to share another handout. Here we go. Okay, so this one, let's see, I'm not sure that I can actually do a scroll on it. Maybe I can. Here it goes. There we go. All right. So this screen, how to decrease anxiety during COVID-19, but these are wonderful things to do for yourself, no matter if it's COVID-19 or, you know, just a regular day if we're back to normal. Breath. Again, when we're anxious, when we're depressed, we breathe very shallowly, or we forget completely how to breathe. So some of you may know the square breathing exercise. If you ever played a wood instrument or a brass instrument, your music instructor told you need to do box breathing, breathing in 4, holding it 4, out 4, and doing that 4 times. And physiologically, you can't help but have more oxygen go to your brain, and calm your, you know, your heart rate goes down. If you can do that throughout the day when you're not anxious or depressed, it's very easy to access when you do become that way. Some of you know about the progressive muscle relaxation, tensing your muscles and then exhaling and relaxing as you go through. By the way, I did want to mention, of course, there's a load of apps out there, from Headspace to something I really like called Anxiety Release. And Anxiety Release is actually formulated by somebody who is a EMDR specialist, and that's another whole thing, but his name is Mark Grant, and that's a really good app you can download for about $3 to $4 on your smartphone. Connecting again to your spirituality, which, you know, we kind of went through a little bit in that last one. 5 senses are grounding. One of my favorite things to do with clients, no matter what age they are, from 5 to 85. I love to do something which is a grounding exercise in which they notice their senses. So what do you see? Label that in your mind. What do you hear? What do you hear right now? What do you feel on your skin? What do you smell? Are you tasting anything? And when you do that, you can't help but presence yourself, and then you're grounded in the moment. So instead of being anxious and rehearsing the future, or ruminating about the past, or being depressed, you were there, right there in that moment. It doesn't mean that, like, you know, it's hard to do because an anxious thought will come by, or a depressive thought will come by. We are geared to be that way from our primitive brains from back in the day. And then just get right back into the 5 senses and grounding yourself and presenting yourself. Distracting yourself with the alphabet, that's a cute little game that you can play, especially with the young ones. The topic is food: apple, banana, cantaloupe, date, whatever. And if anybody wants any of these handouts, I did want to offer them. They can go through Karen, if she's okay to share them, or me, either way. Do something productive. For me, I love it when there's a lot of leaves on the ground. I don't go out and blow them, and I don't have the landscapers come and do it. I go out there and I rake them myself, because that's what helps me calm down. I feel like I can control something. I can control those leaves going into a bag, and it may take all day, but that's very, very helpful for me. But there's a whole list of things, as you see there, on doing something productive. Staying on a schedule, and I know that's been a difficult one for parents, especially with their little ones or their big ones, you know, making sure everybody gets up at a certain time. They do go to school, even if it's virtually. I know that most of the elementary schools, I believe, have gone back at the Dripping Springs school district, but there's still a lot of changes. So just making sure that you make times to stay on a schedule, and make time for play. That is very important. Make time for rest. And as Esme said, control what is yours to control. And I couldn't have a better job on that. And then I didn't realize that there was a little plug down here at the bottom of this handout. It was actually shared to me from our director, clinical director, Shauna Moss. But remember, you can always call the Samaritan Center. And I believe that will bring me into the last of my little presentation here. And let me tell you about when it might be important to think about, perhaps I need something more. You know, all these little interventions that I've tried, no go. I might need to reach out and get some guidance from a counselor or a therapist, or maybe my child does, or maybe we both do. So there's about 7 different, I would say, things to look for when you feel like you might need a little bit more. And one of them is just feeling completely overwhelmed. Like you feel like you have too many things to do. The committees are going off in your head like all night long, no matter what you do, even if you do heart focused breathing, which I love to teach people. And if we have time, I'd love to do a little exercise like that later with you. And you just have too much to cope with. And stress and overwhelm, of course, can lead to some physical health issues as well. If you're extremely fatigued, not just normally tired or like, oh my gosh, but if like for more than 2 weeks, it's really difficult for you to, you know, even get out of bed or, you know, get a good night's sleep. And there's a lot of physical symptoms going on. You're getting major headaches or stomach aches, or they're manifesting in a somatic way. That's another warning sign. Agoraphobia, I'm wondering if some of us have actually, I know that some of my more introverted and socially anxious clients who loved the shutdown in the beginning, and they wondered if it was maybe encouraging them or reinforcing their social anxiety, because it's like, wow, this is wonderful. And now that things are beginning to open up some, they're finding that they're having a little bit of agoraphobic symptoms. So, you know, agoraphobia and you know, going out where you're feeling like you're trapped. That could be another sign. Intrusive thoughts, where we all have anxious and self-negative thoughts. I mean, just like I said, it's part of like our, as I say, our downstairs brain down here, our amygdala goes wild sometimes. But if it's happening a lot and you just can't stop it, and you feel like there's an obsessive compulsive kind of feedback loop going on in your head, that's another time that you might need to look at, perhaps I should get a little bit more help. And then feeling hopeless, completely hopeless about the future. Like very often, like you ask yourself in the last 2 weeks, how often have I felt hopeless about the future? And if your answer is often or very often, we all get little feelings of hopelessness, but that's a long time. So over 2 to 3 weeks of that, I would say, is also something to consider about maybe seeking guidance. And then social withdrawal. Again, it's okay to spend some time alone. That's part of our self-care, our me time and our alone time. That's very, very important, so that we can get kind of that spiritual recharge to get back into the charge of our children and the charge if we have aging parents and all of that stuff. But if you feel that you're so distressed around others, or you actually are fearing being around other people, then therapy could help you understand and deal with those feelings. And so I hope I covered what I was tasked to tonight. And if anybody, I guess, has any questions, they're all going into the chat.
Thank you so much, Teresa. We do have a couple of questions. If we could have maybe Esme and Laura come back on as well. I'm gonna punt over to Karen Jones. I think she's got a couple of questions, and I've got one over here as well. Karen, do you have a couple of questions that you wanted to? Oh, I think you're muted, my friend. That's okay. I'll start, Karen, if you want to send those to me, the ones that you received. So one of the questions is, you discussed co-regulation. Can you, this is a question for Teresa, or any of them. You discussed co-regulation with children. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Okay, and Esme and Laura, experts as well, so please chime in. The way I understand co-regulating is, it's as you are regulating and as you are, I mean, they even talk about this with early childhood development, with infants, you know, let's even talk about like infants and the mother. Co-regulating is, the baby is crying, the baby is very upset. You know, this is what happens with babies, right? Or with very young children. And so how we co-regulate is we get ourselves into a calm, relaxed, and regulated state. And then as we're calm and regulated, we do our best to, you know, eye contact, hold the baby, show that we're understanding them, show empathy, rocking with them. Now, what that looks like as through the developmental stages of childhood all the way through the teen years is going to absolutely look different. But I think the most important thing is your own regulation. And if you can remain as regulated as possible, then that empathy or that message goes to the child or the teen. And if Esme and Laura want to weigh in even with more detail on that, I think that'd be great.
Sure, I think that's a great example. I think about how our nervous systems kind of match the nervous systems of those around us. And so when we can steady our breathing, when we can relax our muscles, when we can calm and ground ourselves, we're able to then provide that for someone else. And so the idea of co-regulation, when I think about it, is kind of leading that charge with whomever we might be with, you know? I think we've all had experiences where we can walk into a room and tell when it's celebratory, and we can walk into a room and tell when it's like testing week, right? And it feels really different. And so thinking about what that's like, especially in this world right now where we're kind of isolated, but kind of together. And so it might take some creativity, I think, to co-regulate. But really, I think, to Teresa's presentation earlier, just about the 5 senses, I think that's an excellent way of practicing co-regulation. It might be playing I Spy with your child to kind of both be noticing what's in your surroundings and using sight as a grounding tool. I love physical touch. So I know sometimes with clients, I'll have them like press our hands against each other, or you know, against like our chair handles or something like that. So really using our nervous systems to help other nervous systems calm, ground, and relax.
Okay, another question here. Parents are, I guess, wanting to know what are some normal responses that you guys are seeing from kids during this pandemic versus when do they need to know when they might need professional help for their kids?
I mean, I think my initial sort of response to that is, as a parent, you know your child best. And so I think it's important to trust that when you are seeing your child react to the stressors of everything that's going on, you know what is normal for them. Now, because of everything that's going on and all of the changes and the differences they're seeing in us and in their world, in their school, it could be a little bit more heightened. So maybe things that you saw, reactions that you saw before that you felt were their reactions to stress, they just might be, you know, like Teresa talked about, sort of that those peaks and valleys might be further apart, and you might notice a little bit more of that. But I think that as a parent, you know them best, and so to know whether they're at a point, you know, where a therapy might be needed, professional help might be needed. I think trusting that instinct. I don't know if y'all have something else you want to add to that. Oh, you're muted, Kim.
Sorry, we have another question. All right. So how does a parent balance how much information they should be sharing about the pandemic?
That's a good question. And I think, kind of like Esme was saying, I think that's one where you know your child best. I think about developmentally too, what might be appropriate for a third grader would be different than what would be appropriate for, you know, a 10th grader. I think being honest, you know, as parent, I just love working with schools so much because I think about parents, and I think about teachers, and there's so many kind of parallel processes. But, you know, as parents, we expect ourselves to have answers, right? To know things. And we are living in a landscape right now where there's not a lot of knowns. So I think I love focusing on the knowns. It's kind of a little phrase that always sticks with me, where when we can talk with our children about what we do know versus and kind of own up to what we don't know, but focusing on things where there is some certainty. So, you know, while we don't necessarily know when schools may go back to full classroom size, or, you know, I mentioned the holidays earlier, you know, there may be some unknowns that come up with that. But what do we know? We know what our favorite toy is in the house. We know how to set up a, you know, Zoom call with girlfriends in the evening and visit. You know, we know how to safely and socially distance. How can we use that to our advantage? So what can we focus on that we do know? I think is one way to talk with young people about kind of easing fears and anxieties. And being really curious, you know, I love kind of flipping questions back and be like, you know, help me understand where that question's coming from. It sounds like you have some concerns and worries. Like, tell me what's going through your mind when you just asked me that question. Because kids of all ages know, like, they know the source and the root of that question. And so rather than feeling like you have to have the answer to something that nobody has the answer to right now, encouraging kind of deeper level curiosity and communication with your kids, I think, is a way to kind of strengthen that bond and to really be able to, like, empathize with them and get to know them better about kind of, you know, where their thinking is coming from and where their worries might lie.
Really like that response. Got some reverberation. We have a couple more questions. This one says, do you let a child fail at the work being asked of them, or help them with their mental stability? We feel like, as parents, we sometimes feel like we're falling short on the schoolwork and mental stability. Like, I guess parents are wondering, you know, where do we, you know, we want our kids to be successful in school. At what point, as parents, do we decide to let that go? And how can you guys address that?
Well, I think that there's, like everything like a balance. You know, I think that there is some benefit to the kids having feelings of success, you know, especially with with times where there's so much uncertainty and sort of feelings of just like, oh, we're not doing well in this, you know, during this time. So providing opportunities where there is success, focusing at times on those and saying, you're really good at sports, let's go try that. And then being honest when there are times, you know, I think that even happens with ourselves, that just saying, it's hard and I don't know how to navigate it. And I'm going to give myself some grace because of that. And telling your child the same way that you would say that, and saying this is hard. Doing math online is a difficult thing. Math is already hard. It was already a challenge for you. Doing it online is a difficult thing. There's a lot of us that are struggling at something that maybe we used to feel confident in, and that now, because of all the changes, we no longer feel confident in that. But I do think that kind of providing that balance of saying, we are not being successful at this right now, and it's okay, things will change and we'll get back to being successful. And then there's times of the days where you can say, you know what, you are really good at, you know, putting the soccer ball in the goal. Let's go outside and do that. And use those times to kind of make them feel good about themselves, because we know we're all going to have those times when we're not going to feel good about themselves. So
That was well said, Esme. Okay, I have one more question on here. If anyone has any final ones, make sure to send those to me in the chat. This one is for parents asking, when is a school counselor more appropriate versus outside professionals? And so if you could, I guess we all could talk about that one, but what do you have to say to parents about that?
I'd like to weigh in on that with my 10 years of being a behavioral specialist in another state. And I worked very much side by side with the counselor, the school counselor. And, you know, I've got to say that for this, they're both wonderful. I work now on the other side, you know, in an agency in the private sector. And one of my favorite things to do when kids come in is to find out, you know, who is your school counselor? Do you have a connection to your school counselor? It's a lot of times I need to collaborate with the school counselor. And I know that some private providers kind of like sort of forget that piece, but to me, I used to see myself as an EAP for children. And let's get them to be as successful as they can be when they go back into the classroom. They need to come to the behavioral specialist, sometimes, you know, sometimes the school counselor, for us to assist them with coping skills and things that they need and tools that they need mental health wise to get them back into the classroom to be successful as possible. Now, if it's deeper than that, if the problems are going, you know, where that's just not working, that's not enough, then you might want to look at, you know, getting a referral to somebody on the outside as well, so that they have someone in the community, you know. And what I think is great though is if you have a therapist in the community, do your best to be sure that that therapist also collaborates with the school on some level. Of course, there has to be informed consent, but that's the child's job. I mean, 8 hours a day is spent in school 5 days a week. So that's why I said I always saw myself as like an assisted program person. An EAP for children is what I used to call myself. I may be the behavioral specialist, but I'm an EAP. And so I think they both are great in their ways, and sometimes the school counselor really is enough, really. And especially if that child says, or that teen or whoever says, I really like my school counselor, they're just terrific. Well, great. You know, they may not need more than that, but I hope that kind of answered the question, and everybody else weigh in, please, you know.
Thank you. Hopefully you guys can hear me, and I'm sorry about the echoing. I'm having some technical difficulties. We want to thank our panelists and all of our partners and let you know that tonight's presentation will be posted on the DSISD YouTube channel. Our next Parent University session is November 5th from 6 to 7:30 with the National Alliance on Mental Health, or NAMI, and it's called Let's Talk. So if you find that you need some additional help, please do not hesitate to contact your school counselors. We can get you in touch with some outside resources, including the ladies who joined us this evening. And we thank you all very much for your time. Good night.
Are you guys watching the chat? A lot of people thanking you for your time.
I can't see that in the chat. That's awesome.
Yeah, I can't see that either, but that's
Okay.
great.
Let me
Yeah.
change.
Oh.
If we can do that. Yeah. So a lot of people just thanking you guys. Just thank you as they're leaving. So
Oh, well, that's awesome.
yeah. Yeah. So we'll let Carrie, if someone that just entered the
Oh,
hold on one second. We're still recording. Let me turn that off.
sure.
Stop.
Oh no, I'm so